another episode of the Coffee, Commerce, and Catechesis podcast. Join us on our journey to learn more about the Christian faith and how we can live it out in our modern world. Celibacy is a word that often gets associated with priests, but it's not exclusive to them. So today we're going to talk a little bit about celibacy even between husband and wife. We're lucky to have Travis's wife, Mabel, on with us today, so let's get right into it. Over to you, Travis.
Thanks, Rigel. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in for another episode of Coffee, Commerce, and Catechesis. Today, as Rigel mentioned, we're talking about not having sex. We're talking about celibacy, and my wife is joining us. So as we always do, we will start off with a passage or quote from someone else to frame the conversation. Today, I'm going to pull a passage from the American Life League, and they state as follows. As recently as 1930, every mainline Protestant church vigorously condemned those sexual behaviors that they considered to be damaging to society and a danger to the souls of individuals. These acts included divorce, artificial contraception, abortion, euthanasia, fornication, adultery, the use of pornography, and homosexual behavior. The Catholic Church is the only remaining major religious entity that holds fast to its prohibitions on these behaviors. For this reason, the Catholic Church is the focus of an unprecedented campaign of propaganda and subversion generated by neoliberal organizations and individuals. One of the most effective tactics used by those trying to confuse church members is false claims about its teachings. So that, I think, is going to frame the conversation that we're going to be having here, which surrounds, obviously, human sexuality generally, and more specifically, what that means for married couples, so within the confines of marriage. And ultimately, that ties back into this idea of celibacy and when celibacy is required of us, what it looks like, and who it's required of. So my wife is joining us for this episode, which is kind of cool, kind of unique. I'll give her bio here briefly, and then we'll welcome her to the conversation. So Mabel was born in rural Colombia and was raised there until she was 10 years old. Her parents separated and divorced when she was 4, and then when she was 10, due to the ongoing civil war and domestic terrorism in the country, which led to death threats against members of her family, she came to Canada as a child refugee along with her mother and one of her brothers. She was raised as a Seventh-day Adventist, and when she met me in 2019, we both were not practicing any religion at all. We were engaged in 2020, found our way slowly toward Anglican Christianity together. We got married secretly in 2021, got married publicly in early 2023, and we were received into the Catholic Church together, and our marriage was validated in April 2024. So to my wife, amor, gracias por venir, bienvenida.
Thank you for inviting me, guys. Glad to be here.
Awesome. So this episode is going to be a little bit different. What we'll do first is we'll explain the Catholic Church's teachings on marriage and sexuality before speaking with Mabel and Travis about their personal experience coming to the Catholic faith and experiencing the Catholic Church's teachings on these matters, and then, of course, living them out. So, Travis, I'll pass it right over to you. Maybe just give us a summary of the Church's teachings on marriage.
Awesome. Yeah. And before we do that, so to everyone listening, my wife is not the kind of person that wants to do a podcast. So whereas Rigel and I love this kind of stuff, my wife is way out of her element. She has kind of agreed to do this against her will, and I'm really appreciative of that. So please do, if you listen to this episode and you know her or you see her, please let her know that you appreciated her putting herself into an awkward position. We're talking about really sensitive stuff, but the reason we're doing that is because we think it's important for people of faith to understand the Church's actual teachings on sexuality, how wonderful and beautiful they actually are. And we have lived through it, and no one else can tell the story like I can, like my wife. And so that's why she's joining us. So we appreciate your patience and understanding as she does something that she is not super comfortable with. But anyways, I wanted to mention that up front. As Rigel mentioned, we're going to start off here slightly different than most episodes with a little catechetical exercise. Catechesis is the name of the podcast. We're going to do that a little bit here because in Rigel and I's own conversations, we realize how little many Catholics even understand about the Catholic Church's teachings on some of these really important issues. And so we're going to start off looking at marriage. And before I do that, I want to mention that everything I'm about to say, we're not theologians, but we love research. And so everything we're about to talk about here comes from the tradition and teaching of the Church, including, first and foremost, obviously the Bible, also the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and then a number of other documents, and I'll highlight a couple of them here. There's a 1995 document from the Pontifical Council for the Family named The Truth and Meaning of Human Sexuality, Guidelines for Education Within the Family. There is Pope St. John Paul II's 1981 Apostolic Exhortation named Familiaris Consortio. There was a 1997 doctrinal document from the Pontifical Council for the Family named Vademecum for Confessors concerning some aspects of the morality of conjugal life. A 2004 doctrinal document from the Catholic Bishops' Conference of England and Wales named Cherishing Life. The 2016 Catechism of the Ukrainian Catholic Church. The 2018 document from the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops named Ethical and Religious Directives for Catholic Healthcare Services, 6th edition, and a number of other ones. We'll put these in the show notes. All of which is to say, we are drawing on a lot of sources here to make sure that what we are doing is talking within the confines of Catholic teaching for the benefit of our listeners. So before I give maybe the technical definition of marriage from the perspective of the church, one of the three of us on this conversation is a cradle Catholic, grew up in the Catholic Church. Rigel, that person is you. You're also married. And so maybe before I give the technical background on marriage, why don't you tell us what your understanding of marriage was growing up in the faith, and then when you came to be married in the church itself?
So I'll be the first to point out that, if, as Travis is explaining things, you as a Catholic or as a Christian or as a non-Christian didn't have this understanding of what marriage is or the teaching of what marriage is as taught by the Catholic Church, don't be ashamed, because it wasn't until recently that I fully appreciated it as well. And I've been a Catholic for 29 years. So that says something. Also, I didn't know a lot of these documents existed ever. So that's another thing. Growing up, I would say my understanding of marriage was very much as the secular world taught. I had a very happy home. My parents are very happy together. So they were good role models, at least for me, of what a good relationship looks like. Now, the Bible teaches and the church teaches that man and woman have separate roles. But growing up, of course, there was, feminism was coming up, and there was an idea of like, oh yeah, women are equal and they're the same and stuff. But it was only until recently that I fully appreciated the truly different roles that God himself has given to men and women. I mean, some things are obvious. Women can bear children and men can't. But in terms of the role within the family itself, that's something I've grown to appreciate a lot more, especially as I'm about to become a father as well. Other than that, I would say even until just before the wedding, my understanding of marriage was pretty lacking, but which is why I'm very glad that the Catholic Church mandates a marriage prep course. Now, I don't know how that works within the Roman Catholic Church, because I'm part of the Syrian Catholic Church or the Syro-Malabar Church. And so we have a specific marriage prep course that is specific to us because we have a few rituals and stuff that are a little bit different. But it was there that I got like a great understanding of what it truly means to be married. In our culture as well, it's not just the union of two people, but also the union of families. Now, that's not theological, but it's important for us culturally. It was also really where we understood the importance of putting God at the center of the marriage, meaning, it's the union between man and wife, but we have to subject ourselves to the Holy Spirit as well. And it's kind of beautiful that it forms like a triangle, or what's a better word for it? Almost like a Trinity. Like it's a replication of the Trinity, which is a really beautiful thing. There's a lot more that I could mention, but it wasn't until recently that I had this understanding. So excited to go deeper into it today.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think your experience of marriage, Rigel, would be pretty normal. Lots of Catholics, especially people born into the faith, these things, it's easy to just take them for granted because you're surrounded by it. You don't necessarily know that there's anything other than what it is that you're seeing. And this is true for anyone in any religious tradition. And I found, because Mabel and I have specifically chosen the Catholic faith and have had to come to learn these things later, I have fallen in love with the church's teachings on marriage, which meant hard things for us, as we're going to get into momentarily. But maybe what we'll do here is, based upon all the documents I've highlighted and stuff, and the things that Mabel and I learned together going through the process of seeking an annulment of my first non-sacramental marriage so that Mabel and I could have our marriage recognized in the church. This is the church's official teaching, a summary thereof of the church's official teaching on marriage, also known as the sacrament of matrimony. The Catholic Church teaches that marriage is a sacred covenant between a man and a woman, ordered towards the good of the spouses and the procreation and education of children. This covenant is raised to the dignity of a sacrament by Christ, signifying the unbreakable union between Christ and the Church. Jesus says, as recorded in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 19, verses 4 through 6, "Have you not read that from the beginning the Creator made them male and female, and said, 'For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, no human being must separate.'" It is in these words of Jesus Christ that we find the essence of the sacrament of marriage, a sacred union instituted by Christ between a man and a woman. This sacrament reflects the mystery of Christ's love for the church, with the husband and wife becoming a domestic church, as it were, that mirrors the universal church. Thus, the church sees marriage as indissoluble, as it reflects God's own covenant with his people. The sacramental nature of marriage elevates it beyond a mere natural contract, making it a permanent and unbreakable bond that cannot be dissolved by any human power. In the Catholic Church, there has never been and can never be such a thing as divorce, no matter what civil authorities say or permit. So that's a summary of the Church's teaching on the sacrament of matrimony or marriage. Rigel has given us a little background on what he thought marriage was or learned marriage to be before getting married himself. What I'd like to do now is maybe ask my wife, Mabel. She grew up in Colombia, an overwhelmingly culturally Catholic country, but she herself was not a Catholic, obviously. And so, Mabel, can you tell us, did you know anything about the Church's teachings on marriage when you were growing up? What was your perception of marriage as you were growing up?
Great question. I think it would have been similar to what Rigel was explaining, very secular. But regarding to the church teachings, I knew nothing. That was like all foreign to me when Travis and I were starting our process and learning more. And I'm like, well, and I just thought that was weird because there were just like so many steps, I guess. I don't know. But obviously coming from the traditions that I came from and probably the traditions that Travis came from too, you don't really talk about those things, like marriage, yeah, it's between a man and a woman, but that's about it. And even, for example, that you're together to procreate, to bring life, that wasn't, it was an option, let's put it that way. So it was very, very limited, I guess. Or not at all. Yeah, that I knew about the church's teachings.
And I think even you and I have come to realize through the education that we've received for our own marriage, what has become a marriage. We were calling it a marriage. We've learned that it actually wasn't that. And now you and I are married. And in that process, we actually learned that almost nobody in your family is even in what the church considers a marriage. So your mother and father got divorced, but they were never married in the church. They weren't even married in a church at all. They just went to the courthouse. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think both of your brothers, their marriages were just effectively at a court. It was just a legal transaction. Is that right?
Yeah, both my brothers they just went to the courthouse and they got married there with their wives. The only that I can recall, my grandparents, obviously. Thank God for them, because that's like the only real example of marriage that I have in my family and in my life, because my aunts and my mom, they're both divorced now.
Something I want to point out there is that, even for me, and I'm guessing it's probably the same for you guys as well, when you're kids, your parents don't really explain the significance of marriage. You know what I mean? It was not until we got close to the wedding date and we did that marriage prep course that we got a full appreciation of what marriage really means. And I think we do kids a disservice by not explaining that sooner. Obviously, there's an appropriate time for these things, but there's a lot of beauty in there that you can explain without having to become inappropriate in what you're explaining. So I think that should be done earlier, because it's almost sad to go for so long with an ignorance of what marriage truly means in our faith.
Absolutely. And maybe right before I turn to the topic of sex, which comes after marriage. And there's a logical reason for that, despite what our secular culture tells us and what Mabel and I both bought into for the majority of our lives until we found the church. There's a reason that marriage comes first and then sex. But maybe Mabel mentioned something there, and I think I'll clarify. English is her second language, so this is the status of our marriage, is when I'm speaking Spanish, she has to correct me constantly. When she's speaking English, even though she's way better at English than I am at Spanish, I often have to interject to make sure that what she said is clear. And in this instance, she said, she was talking about her aunts and her mother, and she said the word both. What she actually meant is all. She has 4 aunts, none of whom are married, but all of whom were married. And those relationships fell apart. And so, unfortunately, Mabel's example in the generation before her is one failed marriage after another, literally across the board. And that's tragic. We have, her and I, many times had to talk about the examples, or should I say lack thereof, of successful marriages that she's seen. The only one that she can point to in her family to this point in time is her grandparents. And theirs is very successful. They've been together for 60 years and it's incredible. But unfortunately, it is the lone example of a strong, firm, self-sacrificial marriage that she can point to. And that is such a blessing because we all need examples. We all need mentors in our lives. She, unfortunately, especially with her own parents, doesn't have that in this respect. And so thank God for her grandparents for having that.
I'd like to add something actually to what Rigel was saying about explaining to kids at a younger age, like not explicitly, like, over the top or whatnot. But for me, I think it would have been great, obviously, right? Like, and I think for all of us, it's a good thing to know. But I think my upbringing and seeing like the broken families within my families led me to just think that, marriage is just like bullcrap. Okay, like no one stays married, and so for the longest time I didn't want to get married, and I had bought in, like Travis said, into this feminism sort of thing, where like I don't want to have kids, I don't want to be married, and if I do, I want to adopt. That was like my I believe that was like one of the first conversations that Travis and I had. If we were to like consider kids, like we would adopt first. And obviously, like it was for the wrong reasons. Now that we can think about it and reflect on them, but it is, you don't get, like, if you don't explain things to kids, you're not allowing them to actually explore into what's out there and the beauty of marriage, right? Which I think is very sad because you form kids to literally maybe like in the future abandon the church, right? And pursue things that they shouldn't really be pursuing.
I also just want to point out one thing before we move on, Travis. We talked about, Mabel, your example of marriages being marriages that have fallen apart. But I think the same is also true if we don't, even if you stay together, but you're not witnessing to what a true marriage looks like. If your kids look to you and they're not seeing that true love, that self-sacrificial love, they're still not going to have a good example. It doesn't matter if you stay together, they're still not going to have a good example. So I think you have to educate the kids, yes, on what marriage really means in the Catholic Church, but you also have to witness to it. You have to practice it. You have to set the example, because you can say a lot of things, but if you're not living it out, that's a problem. And that's a huge burden on parents too, because the highest standards are expected of you.
And we'll turn, Mabel actually, in what she was saying there, highlights perfectly the step towards sex. Because what Mabel said is she had bought into the worldview, as had I, for a period, as had most of us, frankly. Most of us do without even realizing it. We were guilty of it. Bought into this idea that somehow marriage and sex are disconnected. That is, unfortunately, and I'm going to offend a lot of Protestant listeners, and I love you, but you're wrong on this. You didn't change your teachings on sexuality until 1930. So what is more likely? That the church was right for 1900 years and then they just became wrong all of a sudden? Or that you just figured it out, that the church was wrong for 1900 years and you're right now? So unfortunately, the Protestant worldview, which I was raised in and which Mabel was also raised in to some extent, largely we'll get into that later, disconnects procreation and sexuality. And that is tragic. And you can just look at abortion and everything that comes from that as the only logical consequence of the separation of the marital union from sexuality. And so this brings us right to the point, and I'm going to say this with love because our Protestant brothers and sisters need to hear this, because I was the first victim of buying into this Protestant worldview on sexuality. I'm not saying all Protestants hold to this, okay? Like, again, to make the joke, there's 30,000 denominations in the US of Protestants. Like, just pick one, they'll tell you whatever you want to hear and just go to the next one if they don't. But in general, this is the Protestant worldview, and it was certainly the one that I was raised in. And so I'm going to explain now the Catholic Church's teachings on sexuality, and it goes as follows. The Catholic Church's teaching on sex is rooted in the understanding that human sexuality is a sacred gift from God, ordered towards the conjugal love between a man and a woman in the sacrament of marriage. According to the Church's teachings, rooted first and foremost in the Bible and supported by church tradition since the time of the apostles. Sexuality is a fundamental part of the human person, reflecting the love and fruitfulness of God himself. It must be presented with reverence and respect. The sexual expression of love between a man and a woman in marriage is a specifically human act that touches the very meaning of life and the dignity of the individuals involved. It has spiritual, moral, physical, and psychological dimensions that must be fully understood. The Church upholds the goodness and sanctity of the marital union and the family, which are willed by God and elevated to the dignity of a sacrament by Christ. The natural bond of marriage is intrinsically ordered to the good of the spouses and the procreation and education of children. The virtue of conjugal chastity involves the integrity of the person and the integrality of the gift of self in the marital relationship. It requires maintaining the inseparable connection between the unitive and procreative meanings of the conjugal act. As an aside, what that means is procreative means open to life. So in man and woman in marriage coming together sexually, they must be open to life. That's what that sentence is stating. The Church recognizes the value of friendship between all people, including those with homosexual inclinations, when lived chastely in accordance with moral teaching. However, it does not condone the expression of homosexual love in a sexual way. In summary, the Catholic Church's teaching on sex upholds the sacred dignity of human sexuality, its proper place within marriage, and the call to live out the virtue of chastity in all states of life. In short, sex is exclusively for man and woman in a valid marriage.
So I have to say, having read that, it's only recently that I even got a full appreciation for this definition, because even during marriage, like, what they tell you is that sex has a purpose and that purpose is procreation. They didn't actually mention the unitive purpose of sex as well. Now, that is a key component to it, because the Church also appreciates that natural family planning exists. And so there are occasions where, you're open to the possibility of life. You can't be closed off to it. You can't take steps to prevent it from happening. But there is natural family planning, and sex does serve a purpose outside procreation as well. Now, that is a lot more nuanced, and I highly recommend doing some research on it, because it's because of my own curiosity that I actually started looking into it and discovered this and got a more wholesome understanding of it. Mabel, how about you? What was your understanding before you actually, came closer to the faith and got more of an understanding of these things?
Again, very limited. I don't know if it was because growing in a Latino household, or where everything, like, you're just so used to everything being sexualized, like from like soap operas and like TV shows, even the commercials. So like you're very, when you're a kid, like you see like women half naked, right? Like, and it's normal. So as a girl growing up, partly in Colombia and then here, and then having to like two cultures colliding essentially from like up when I grew up, and then moving to Canada, it was very hard. I don't know, like to like, okay, like I have to dress pretty and like, all that stuff, so guys look at you, and like that mentality literally gets like ingrained in you from like a very young age. And I didn't realize that until I saw it on my youngest cousin, who now she is turning 15 years old. And not like, I think it's funny, but like it's not funny at all, because like when she was 9, some of my aunts would be like, you should wear crop tops. It's like, how? No, like a 9-year-old shouldn't be wearing crop tops. Okay, that's just no. Like it's calling for like that shouldn't be the case. But it's just like little things like that, and how like, oh, but like if you don't want to get married, you can have a boyfriend, and then the next day have another boyfriend. Like it's fine. Like there's really no, yeah, there's no example. And then it's just the culture around us. It's like it just allows for it. So for me, I always feel pressured. But one thing I will say though, that really my mom instilled in me. Well, she instilled it in all my siblings, but obviously they didn't follow her. They didn't follow. But she always like, if you ever want to get married, like I don't want to force you or anything, but if you ever want to get married, you want to preserve yourself for that husband. And she always made sure to tell me this. And maybe it was because I was the only girl with, 2 older brothers and stuff, which obviously could have been the case. She probably didn't want me to go through the same thing that she went through or whatnot. But obviously that didn't happen because as soon as like, you're a teenager, like you're like on your late teens and stuff, and you're in high school, and it's like, oh, like I can go all crazy and stuff, and like, yeah, like it was hard. And I've talked to Travis about this. I'm like, if I knew God was saving me for you, like we were gonna meet eventually, like I would have waited. Like I would have waited for you. Didn't matter if I had to wait 5 years until that happened, right? But it unfortunately it was very limited. What I knew, and it's not that I regret it, because now that happens, but hopefully we get to make it better from now.
I will interject there and expand. It's even worse than Mabel's saying. So Colombia, yes, culturally Catholic. It also has one of the highest rates of birth control use in the world, which is impossible. You can't be a Catholic and use birth control. Like, I don't care what you say. You don't know your faith if you're doing it. So like, spare me. You don't understand Catholicism. Not a thing. So for a country to be nominally Catholic and then have one of the highest rates of birth control usage, impossible. That just speaks to the terrible level of formation for, sadly, so many Colombian Catholics. Mabel was not Catholic, but she grew up in that culture where sexuality is overt. It's a hot climate. Obviously, I've talked about this in the past. The way women dress to go to mass is shockingly inappropriate. It's the opposite of modesty, sadly. And so when Mabel was growing up in that, she didn't have good examples of marriage around her. Her parents' marriage fell apart. Thank God for her mother at least instilling some semblance of, marriage is important. Even though she didn't have an example to point to herself, she recognized it was. And so Mabel at least sort of knew that, which I think helped Mabel not go as far off the rails as some other people do in our culture, as is so normal. But I will say, I'll share this story. When Mabel and I were together, it was one of our first dates, actually. And Mabel had bought so much into this worldview that sexuality outside of marriage is somehow something to be championed and good, that Mabel actually, she lied to me and she told me a story that didn't happen about how she had a one-night stand with a man that she met on a holiday. She told me that thinking I would be impressed by it. And I was actually the opposite. It was like a dagger in the heart. For probably 2 years after that, this issue came up and up again until she actually confessed the truth to me, that she had made up this story, but she had told it to me, so she didn't want to be seen as a liar, which I understood, because she'd backed herself into a tough corner. And the only reason in the first place that she'd said that is because she had bought so much into this lie around sexuality in our culture, having no understanding, nor did I, of course. I didn't know what the church's teachings were. We weren't even talking about the church at the time. But this girl who I had met and was falling in love with told me that she'd had a one-night stand. And I was so hurt by that, that it caused a real wound in our relationship that we've obviously gotten over. But she didn't want to tell me that. She just felt pressured by our culture for some reason to make it seem like she had more quote unquote experience sexually. And I think that speaks really to how little either of us knew about sexuality when we first met each other, and before we found the church.
Something I want to mention right here. Mabel, you mentioned your mom did a good job of telling you to save yourself in marriage and stuff. I feel like it's very common for girls to get this talk and not as common for guys to get the same talk. I'm also noticing, Travis, you mentioned, it was like a dagger in the heart when Mabel told you the story. I feel like for guys, there is this like a psychological factor that plays into it. Even if you go on the Reddit, at the subreddit called r/Catholicism, you will see a bunch of people, guys on there, complaining that women are not virgins anymore before marriage. Now, are they? Can you expect that of someone else if you haven't, preserved yourself for marriage? So I'll put this to both of you. What advice would you have for people out there that are looking for partners in this world where people don't have an appreciation of saving yourself for marriage? What advice would you have for them in terms of expectations of your, hopeful partner?
I would say if you're listening to this and you are a Christian, we keep coming back to this theme about counterculturalism. You have to be radically countercultural. If you grew up anywhere in the Western world, and I'm using Colombia, which is a developing country, but I guess in the Americas, even in Colombia, if you're going to be a Christian, you have to be radically countercultural. And so if you want to find someone who has Christian values, you're also looking for like a needle in the haystack in some respects. You're looking for someone else who's prepared to be countercultural. And that's no easy thing. And so what I would say, given my own, completely broken lived experience with matters of marriage and sexuality, is you have to be countercultural yourself. You have to set an example and you have to live the thing that you want. And if you can't do that, you can never expect it of somebody else, right? Like that's just a fact. Like that's hypocrisy at its worst. So if what you want is this, and I think we all do, if what you want is that, start with yourself, live it yourself, and hopefully you'll find someone else. But you at least have to control what you can, and that is your own actions. Would be my advice, I think. I don't know, babe, what would you say?
Yeah, I think if I was looking at myself, say 9 years ago, 15, 16-year-old, that it's like, because it's like around that age, when like you really start looking at people that are much older than you, or well, not even that much older, but like a year older than you. It's like, oh, they're doing this, they're doing that. So like that envy, or kicks in, and you want to be doing all those things too. I think definitely, like if you have good parents, I think trusting in that they actually do want the best for you. But again, I think praying, I think would have probably saved me a lot. Even just like a peace, because sometimes like you would just do things for the sake of doing them, just because your friends were doing them, right? And it's just like, and it's so normal for teenagers to do that nowadays without really thinking rationally about the consequences. But very, very focusing on yourself for sure. And like Travis said, being countercultural is definitely, it's not wrong. It's the best way to go.
Start with, don't use Tinder as like a bare minimum. If you can even win that battle, or whatever the equivalent to Tinder, I don't even know. I don't even know if Tinder still exists, but something like Tinder exists. Just don't use it. Just start there. And you've already probably won like 50% of the battles by not making sexuality transactional, if you can do that. But that will mean that you have to tell all your friends probably that no, you're not willing to do the thing that most of them either are doing or thinking about doing or don't have a problem with, as a way to start.
Can I add one more thing, Travis? So unsolicited advice from me: if the deed has been done, so to speak, start now in terms of the way you act. So, if you have fallen before, commit yourself now to staying celibate until marriage. It's not too late. I mean, it kind of is, but it's also not. I mean, all you have control over is who you are today. And so what you decide to do today is what'll shape tomorrow. In addition to that, I would also say, if there is someone that you're hoping to marry one day, be very upfront. And say, I made these mistakes before I fully appreciated, my faith and what marriage really means, and be upfront with them. They will appreciate it. I have no doubt about it.
So that takes us to the last of the three topics before we get in really to Mabel and I's personal story and the challenges therein, but also the beauty therein. And that last topic is annulments. So just to be abundantly clear, there is no such thing as Catholic divorce. If you think there is, your eyes don't work, because there's no such thing. Never in the history of the church, never in the future of the church can there be a thing as divorce. It does not exist, not a thing, ever, never can be.
Also, just because a court gives you a piece of paper, that doesn't mean your Catholic marriage has been dissolved.
Exactly. And I would even go further than that. Just because a government is calling something doesn't make it that thing. There's no such thing as gay marriage. I don't care what you say. Marriage is a sacrament between a man and a woman. So I don't care what you call it. You can call yourself a purple elephant. That doesn't change the fact that you're a human being. So the government calling something doesn't make it that thing. Matrimony or marriage is between a man and a woman, and it is an unbreakable commitment in the eyes of the church, which is where it comes from. The government didn't come before the church. The government of Canada didn't come before the Catholic Church. Nice try. So what we can talk about is annulments. And annulments are a very different thing. And this is a delicate thing. I've lived through it. For anyone that's listening that has ever lived through it or knows someone that has lived through it, it's a hard thing. And so if you are going through it right now, my heart is with you because I've lived through it, but it exists for a reason. And so what we'll do is we'll chat briefly about annulments, because if not for that process, Mabel and I could not be together and we couldn't be Catholic. And so, this is something that is incredibly important as part of our story and our journey to the Christian faith. So the teachings of the Catholic Church on annulments. The church recognizes that in some cases, a marriage may be declared null, which means it never truly existed as a valid sacramental bond. The church has a judicial process to examine the validity of a marriage and determine if there are grounds for a declaration of nullity. Importantly, this declaration of nullity is not the same as a divorce, which would dissolve a valid marriage. Rather, a declaration of nullity affirms that a true marriage never in fact took place. The grounds for nullity include defects in the consent of the spouses, such as one or both willingly excluding an essential property or element of marriage. A declaration of nullity is not a mere formality. It requires a serious examination of the objective truth about the validity of the union. The indissolubility of marriage is a core tenet of the Christian faith, and the church must balance the search for truth with the need to uphold and protect the sacramental nature of marriage. In summary, the Catholic Church recognizes the possibility of a declaration of nullity in certain cases, but this is distinct from divorce, which is an impossibility and requires a rigorous judicial process to ascertain the objective truth about the validity of the union.
And just before I get into my understanding of annulments, Travis, just tell our audience just how judicial this process was.
Yeah. So my process for the declaration of nullity for I'm not even going to call it a marriage, for the thing that I was calling a marriage because I didn't understand what marriage was, to the person that I was with for a period of my life. And it is a full legal process. Okay. So it's not a formality. It is not a joke. I had to call 4 witnesses. Okay. So 4 people. These witnesses had to be able to speak to the relationship that existed at the time of the marriage, not what happened after the marriage. There's nothing that happened after the marriage that can change what happened at the time of the marriage. So as an example, the thing that a lot of Protestants mistakenly point to, and they'll use scripture because they don't understand what they're actually talking about. So nice try, the passages that they try to use saying, well, in the case of infidelity, divorce is a possibility. No, that's not what it means. If that was the case, then Jesus is encouraging infidelity. That's moronic at best and irresponsible at worst. No. Nothing that happens after the marriage invalidates the marriage. So the process to determine if there was, in fact, an invalid marriage, which is what the declaration of nullity is seeking after, is trying to figure out at the time of the relationship when the supposed marriage happened, could it have actually happened? So I had to call 4 witnesses, people that knew myself and this woman, who each had to go through an in-depth, I think it was 60 to 90 minute interview to try to tackle what actually occurred between myself and this person. I also had to. And then once we give our testimony, the canon lawyers get involved in piecing together all of the information to try to figure out, could that man and woman have actually gotten married at that time? And this process can take a long time. I was told when it started, which was summer of 2023, I was told that it could take 18 to 24 months, somewhere in that range. And that's normal. That's normal because it's a legal process. And look at any sort of legal process, and you will find that ascertaining the truth takes time in all circumstances.
So my piece on what I understood about annulments will be very short because I learned everything as Travis went through the process. It's one of those things within the church, I think, where you almost don't want an understanding of it because you hope you'll never need it. But it's good to have because you might need to advise someone. Someone might be in a tricky situation and might need your help, and of course you might need it. You just hope that you don't. But yeah, my understanding was null, no pun intended. Before I kind of almost walked alongside Travis as he told me about all the things that he had to do, and it was very enlightening for me. Also gave me a deeper appreciation of just how seriously the church takes marriage. Like obviously you kind of know that, in all the things that you're taught, but you don't fully appreciate it. So it's one thing to know and another thing to like truly understand. So yeah, very different appreciation for it now as opposed to before. Mabel, what about you?
It's very similar to Rigel's. I don't think I ever heard anyone talk about annulments in my 28 years of life, actually, until obviously Travis was going through it, and then it just came to be that, like that's what it is and why it's there for. And I don't think even people in my family have ever gotten an annulment of some sort, because I don't think, Protestants, right, and they don't see that as being beneficial. So yeah, it was nothing.
Makes sense. I mean, if me as a cradle Catholic didn't know much about it, like I wouldn't expect you to, honestly. I want to switch gears here a little bit. Travis, Mabel, how did you and Travis actually meet?
Yes. Okay. Well, we worked for the same company, but we never really would have talked, or we would have, saw each other in the hall or whatever, but we would have never talked until I went actually and talked to him.
You made the first move.
I made the first move, yeah.
But hold on a second. It's not like you just came up and talked to me. Like, tell the whole story.
Of course, no, I did not, because that wouldn't have been me. That's not me. It was actually, he was on a trip to Italy with some of his friends, and he was just posting photos. Well, actually, I have to backtrack a little bit. Because the story wouldn't make any sense, because how did you follow him? Duh. But so probably like 2 months prior to him going to that trip to Italy, I was telling my mom, actually, and a coworker of mine, that I'm like, I've always found him, very attractive. And then I stumbled upon his like Instagram handle very randomly, actually. And then I just followed him. But we never talked. We followed each other, but we never talked. And then so it wasn't until he went to Italy that I'm like, like the heart-eye emoji, I would like just send tons of them. Like, all his beautiful photos and all that stuff. So that's how like I got the conversation going. So I did slid into his DMs that way.
Stacy won't admit it, but she slid into mine as well. So you're in good company.
No way.
Yeah, it's crazy how that, like, now to think about that's how it happened. Very modern, love story. But yeah, we kept on talking, actually, when he was there, and then he came back, and then obviously I came to find out that he liked soccer just like me, so we kind of like bonded with that too. And then that year, Colombia happened. Well, not Colombia, but like there happened to be like the major tournament for South American football, which is called Copa America, and Colombia was doing pretty well. So I think I invited you to come and watch a game with me, but he was busy, I believe. But then he countered that. He's like, well, next time. So I'm like, okay, yes, I don't have to I don't have to ask again, which we did, but it wasn't for a soccer game though. because by that time Colombia had already been disqualified. So, but we did go to a Latino bar restaurant, and then that was our first date.
And from there, that would have been June of 2019. So, more than 5 years ago. And from there, we started going on dates more regularly. And then a couple months later, I asked her to be my girlfriend. And that's, it feels like a lifetime ago, but that's how we met. She slid into my DMs.
Yeah, it's funny though, because he always told me like, oh no, we were dating since like the first date. I'm like, you're weird. You haven't asked me. You haven't asked me to be your girlfriend. We cannot like. So it was very like that's not true. So like that literally from our first date to like when he actually asked me to be his girlfriend, like 2 months, right?
Yeah,
2 months.
2 months. So yeah,
2 months.
You became my girlfriend August of 2019, and then 1 year later, exactly 1 year later, I asked you to marry me. It was during the pandemic, and so there wasn't a lot that we could do. But I asked you in August of 2020 to marry me, and we started planning a wedding. And then obviously there was a lot of chaos with COVID and stuff. But to bring the story up to sort of what this has meant for us and living our life together as celibate husband and wife. We planned a wedding. COVID derailed it. A year later, August of 2021, I went through a health crisis. That was really hard. Mabel and I were living like pagans. We were living together. We weren't Christians. We were living purely materialistic lives. I've talked about this before. I went through a health crisis, literally thought I was going to die because of heart defects. And so in sort of this bizarre way, we had just started finding our way back to some semblance of Christianity. Anglicanism is where we ultimately landed. We got married very secretly in an Anglican church, very secretly, I was thinking I'm making things right. Like she's not just my girlfriend, living together, we're going to get married. And then what ended up happening is I found out about the church's teachings about marriage after that and realized that, oh man, I've put us in a tough spot. But so we got married technically October 2021. Then we had the wedding we'd been planning but had delayed because of COVID. We had the party basically in Colombia in January 2023. And then those weren't weddings though, because I couldn't get married because of prior circumstances. So it was April of 2024 when we found out that the annulment of my prior marriage had been granted. Mabel and I were able to come into the church together. And on that day is when our marriage was actually made valid and we were man and wife.
That's awesome. Love to hear that story always. But when Stacey and I first met you guys, you weren't yet considering Catholicism as a possible path forward. So maybe, Travis, if you want to tell us about your journey towards Catholicism and how you eventually told Mabel about it, because I do remember we've mentioned it a couple of times on the episodes where I was part of the journey. You were coming to Mass with me at St. Mary's Cathedral, but you weren't telling Mabel about it yet. So maybe tell us a little bit more.
Yeah. So Mabel and I got married. We were attending the Anglican church. We would have considered ourselves Anglicans, if I'm honest. This is hard to admit because the only reason, there's a lot about Anglicanism that I find beautiful and, incredible churches, all of which were Catholic first. Just a reminder to my Anglican friends, they were all Catholic churches first, including Durham Cathedral, where I graduated after doing my MBA. The church is 1,000 years old. It was Catholic for the majority of that history. But there was a lot about Anglican Christianity that I fell in love with. And what I loved most about it is that they allowed divorce and remarriage, I think. But it felt very Catholic. And so to me, because I wasn't prepared to do what I'm obsessed with now, which is follow things to their logical conclusion, Anglicanism just sat well because they didn't have hard teachings on marriage. They were pretty loosey-goosey about all sorts of stuff like that. But it felt Catholic. So Mabel and I got married October 2021. We're Anglicans. And I was doing the master's degree in theology. And Rigel, you and I were working together. And we just started talking about Catholicism, the differences between Catholicism and Anglicanism, how much I felt an attraction to Catholicism. And I would have given you, Rigel, the reasons for why I just couldn't go there. My family, my father being a Baptist pastor, my wife having grown up Seventh-day Adventist, which is militantly anti-Catholic, even more so than the Baptists. And And yet there was something about Catholicism that kept calling me. And the more I learned about it while studying in a Protestant seminary, the more every time I asked the question, but is this true? I always got directed to Catholicism. Always, 100% of the time. And I'm still studying in the Protestant seminary. I've done 75% I've done 15 of the 20 classes that are required for my master's degree. And I still do most of my classes in Protestant colleges. And always the question is either never answered. If I have a hard question about Protestantism, it's either never answered or the answer is a Catholic answer. It directs me there. And so you and I went to Mass in the spring of 2022, after I'd finished my first year of study in this program. And Catholicism was starting to feel really attractive, I would say. But I was afraid to tell Mabel because, well, again, she was feeling pretty comfortable in the Anglican Church, and you just don't go Catholic. Like, go anywhere but not Catholic, because, well, then you have to tell your family that you're thinking Catholic, and they're you know pagan, idol worshiping Mary lovers, and that's what we were told growing up. And we were living with Mabel's mom, who's a practicing Seventh-day Adventist, and so I couldn't tell Mabel that you and I were going to Mass. So I wasn't lying to my wife, but I wasn't being as honest with her as I probably could have been, and I just felt sort of trapped. I don't know, Mabel, what is your recollection? Do you remember me ever going to Mass with Rigel? Like, what do you remember from that time? This was spring of 2022.
Yeah, 2 years. Wow. No, I like, at first I didn't think it was weird. I'm like, oh, he's going with Rigel, whatever. But then sometimes he wouldn't even tell me where he was going. So I'm like, okay, well, this is weird. Like, we're meant to go home. So then I would have to, granted that it was spring, summer, so I could walk home, right? But it was like, yeah, this is just, why are you hiding? What are you hiding? Especially when, it wouldn't be, during lunchtime, which during lunchtime is fine because you guys, you would go for walks and stuff. But, at 5 p.m., it's just like, what's after work, But I never really brought it up. There was never I just, I wasn't killing myself for okay, what is he doing, but it was, I just found it very weird that, why, almost every single day he has something, after work or whatever. But, yeah, that was it. I don't really think I ever told you, what's going on, why.
No, you never asked. And it was only for a short period of time. And then what happened, and this is where the story gets really to us finding the church and what it meant for our lives. My friend Yuri got married. He's Italian, got married in Italy, and Mabel and I went for the wedding and took Mabel's mother. So my mother-in-law, she came with us. And so the three of us did a holiday in Italy in July of 2022. And while we were there, I'd been into Italy many times before. I've had the good fortune of doing it. I was there when Mabel first messaged me, so that's Italy is a part of our story. But when I was there, I went into almost every single church I could find. And of course, they're all Catholic churches. And I just felt peace. I felt home. I felt the experience of beauty. And every time I left, I'm like, I just want to go to the next one. And so we got back from that trip, July 2022, and I'd really found myself, I'd run out of reasons. Intellectually, I'd run out of reasons to believe that Catholicism isn't true. That had happened before the trip, but I was like, well, it's just one of many churches. But then after the trip to Italy, I'm like, no, it's not. It's not. It came before all churches. So all of them are just like a cheap version of it. And the arguments for those things they're intellectually weak at best, I had found. And I wanted them to be true, is the thing. I wanted the arguments to be true. I was looking for confirmation that those arguments against the church were true, and they all were lacking. And some of them badly, including first and foremost the tradition I was raised in. And so I came back from that trip thinking Catholicism is true, but I cannot tell my wife that because the church's teachings on marriage are what they are, and I believe they are true. And that means we're not married.
And so what happened next, Travis?
So about 3 months went by, and Mabel actually came with you and I to Mass one day. I can't remember, babe, do you remember when that was? It would have been like September?
It would have been sometime in September. It was, during the fall. I remember actually, I'll probably get to, explain my feelings later, but I just want to say this, I remember feeling very, very weird, just because coming from the traditions, but not really at the same time. You know what I mean? From the traditions that I came from, it was like, okay, well, everything that they had told me about Catholicism or lied to me about Catholicism, right? What Catholicism was like just coming to me. It's like, okay, yeah, they do that. You know, so I was like, I wasn't really present, as you say that. I was being very judgmental. And I do recall, because Travis told me when we get in the car, he's like, why are you grumpy? And he says that all the time, actually. He says that all the time. But like, he's like, why are you grumpy? We just left church. And I do recall that, because we had an argument there. And I don't know if that also took him longer to tell me because of that argument that we had. But I mean, once I got time to reflect on it, I'm like, that was actually really peaceful and calming, you know. And I don't know, obviously, it is divine, you know, His divine grace, because I just felt like that I didn't belong there, because I was still clinging to Anglicanism, because it wasn't fully Catholic, you know. It was like right down my mom, my family didn't say anything for us for us going to the, you know, Anglican church, so it was good, you know. So I was very comfortable.
So you actually didn't have the same benefit that Travis had, in terms of, like, he had done the study and there was
Yes,
something that was leading him towards it. So
exactly.
when he goes to mass, he's like, okay, this is like confirming the things that I've learned.
Yes.
Whereas when you go, you still have your past experiences of all the things that you've been told about Catholicism. And so it's a little bit different, where it's like confirmation bias of, oh yeah, they do those things, and that's why they're not the real church, kind of thing.
For sure.
Right.
Yeah, and I remember that. Mabel's funny, because she's admitting one of the things that I always ask her, like, why are you grumpy? Actually, I call her Grumpy Bear, is my nickname for her, because her demeanor is that she's naturally like more in a state of grumpiness, whereas I'm just not. And so it's like my go-to joke is, why are you grumpy? And after that mass, that we went to with you, Rigel, I just confronted her and I said, what are you upset about? And we had an argument, and it was very clear to me. And Rigel, I appreciate what you had just said there. It was hard for me to put myself in the shoes of her. Not just, people don't understand how anti-Catholic Seventh-day Adventism is. And we're going to talk about this on another episode, but Seventh-day Adventists, i.e. what Mabel was raised to believe, still teach that the Catholic Church is the whore of Babylon, as outlined in the book of Revelation. Like, that's not something that just was talked about during the Reformation, and now Protestants are embarrassed about it. Adventists still teach that. They still teach that the Pope is the Antichrist. And so when you're raised in that tradition, I can appreciate for Mabel then going into a Catholic church and seeing all these things without having had the benefit of like a formal master's level education at the University of Toronto, like I was experiencing. It's only natural that she would have felt super weird. But I asked her then, what is true? The question isn't, how do you feel about something? The question is, what is true? How you feel about it is irrelevant, because you can feel a lot of things about a lot of other things that aren't true. What you should care about is it true? And it took me probably about another month. And I remember this very well. And this gets to where we decided to convert. I picked up Mabel from a nail appointment. She's getting her nails done, like she just did the other day too. She was getting her nails done, and I picked her up, and it was outside of the building's called the Metropolitan. It's downtown Calgary. And I picked her up, and we hadn't even pulled away yet. This is just, I'd been wanting to vomit these words out, and I'd been so scared to do it for so long. And finally, I basically just told Mabel, Catholicism is the truth. And I cannot do anything other than pursue the truth. I can't live a lie. We need to become Catholic, but I can't do this without you. And to Mabel's credit, she's way braver than I was at the time, because it took me so long to tell her that. And she didn't push back. I can't remember the exact words, but you basically told me, I trust you, and I believe that if you believe it's true, then I do too. So what do we do next? And so that is how we decided to be Catholic.
Okay, so at this point, you've decided to become Catholic as a couple. What happened next?
So before I told Mabel, I had actually taken the step to go and talk to a priest at St. Mary's Cathedral and learn the steps for someone like myself. The priest had connected me with a canon lawyer. For those who don't know, canon lawyers are the people that understand the very complicated teachings of the church from a human perspective in the lived world is really what that means for lay people, for people like us. It's more complicated than that, but for someone like myself, the canon lawyers are there to help the church navigate complicated situations, including, especially in my instance, what someone who's been civilly divorced is able to do. And so I had taken the step to go and learn what the process might be like. And that was really hard because I knew what I was going to put Mabel through to become Catholic. It wasn't that I was afraid of that for myself. I'm not easily afraid of things. I don't shy away from hard things. Like, that's just not in my nature. But it's very different for me to put someone I love through something hard, especially something that they never asked for, never signed up for. And so, but to bring it back to, is this true? If it is, then I have to at least run it to ground. I have to do everything in my power to get us to what I believe the truth is. And so what happened is I knew the process. Rigel, you connected us with, knowing that we were Anglicans at the time. You knew, hey, I've met a priest who used to be Anglican and now he's Catholic. I should connect you. That priest is Father Adrian Martins. You connected us with Father Adrian Martins. Mabel and I went and met with him on a Sunday, had a great conversation. Turns out that he knows a bunch of my family members, and his story of finding Catholicism was not dissimilar from ours. I mean, in many ways, yes, but from the same traditions and stuff. And he said, you know what? You should chat with my friend, Father Robert Bengry, who is the head of the Ordinariate here in Calgary. And for those who don't know, the Ordinariate is the basically diocese within the Catholic Church that was created in 2012 to bring Anglicans and Methodists and other Protestants back into communion with the Catholic Church. And so almost all of the priests were previously non-Catholic priests. And so the process looked like Mabel and I went and had a meeting with Robert Bengry, Father Robert Bengry, in November of 2022. We had a long conversation. He explained exactly what the annulment process would look like, gave us his recommendations on how we could start living, insofar as it was possible, the Catholic life. And we started attending Mass at that parish and started preparing for what the annulment would look like, which started for me with, unfortunately, well, at the time it was unfortunate, it worked out well, but I had to reach out to people and say, will you be a witness? Which was hard to do because for those who are listening, I don't know that I can adequately describe what I was actually asking of these people. These people don't believe Catholicism is true. These people, some of these people who I had to ask, some of these people literally think that we've been deceived, that we are buying into the greatest lie ever told, that the Catholic Church is the church. And I'm now asking them to come to an office, sit down with a bunch of Catholics, be interviewed about something that happened 7 or 8 years before, and do so because I want to be Catholic. I had to ask them, and I had to reach out to my ex-wife, don't even know where she lives, don't know what's going on in her life, haven't talked to her in years, and ask if she would also be willing to be interviewed. That was stomach churning to have to do that, but that's exactly what had to happen. And anyways, that was part of the process to start the annulment. While that was going on, Mabel and I, though, started living a Catholic life effectively and doing everything we could outside of the fact that we could obviously not participate in the sacraments of the church.
So, Mabel, I have to ask you then, how are you feeling through this whole process? Because, I mean, for you, I would say in a way there was more being asked of you than of Travis. And so to, be sitting in these meetings and to be told by priests and, other Catholic people, what is required of you to become Catholics, how did you feel about all that?
I think weird is the right word to explain it. It was just not normal, really. Like it's like, okay, well, to be able to join this church, I have to do this, and now that I think about that, it's like, okay, no, there is an expectation, there is an expectation, and you have to meet those expectations, really, because not, if you want to join, like if you want to become Catholic, from being Protestant or whatever, like there is there is a higher level expected of you. So going to the Ordinariate, like Shai has explained, I felt probably again comfortable because it was very similar to from what we had just left. which was Anglicanism. And it felt great. It felt great. So yeah, there was more expectation, especially from the point of view of having to explain to your family. And to be honest, like Travis and I thought my family was going to have to fit. Like, for example, my grandparents, who are very committed Adventists. And I think they've been their whole life, since they were children. They were probably born into it. And my mom, with my brothers, I didn't have like an issue with, like, at all, like whatever. They're not even practicing Christians anyway, so it's like whatever. But like those three, for me, yeah, I was just so scared, because I'm like, okay, now I have to tell them, that Travis and I are joining, we're converting from Anglicanism to Catholicism. I know the things that they've said, but to give them some credit though, like, because my grandparents live in Colombia and it's so culturally Catholic, like all the holidays that we have in Colombia are Catholic holidays. Every feast day in Colombia is essentially of a saint or something that actually the Catholic Church celebrates. So unconsciously, they may not know, like they may know that it's, a Catholic feast or, or a holiday, but they don't, like it's not foreign to them, right? So that was for me the hardest part, and where the expectations came from.
While Mabel was explaining this, it was more than that, because it wasn't just that we were becoming Catholic. At this point, we hadn't really explained to them what it required of us, including specifically that our marriage isn't a marriage, and we can't be physically intimate with one another. And
which is an interesting thing, because in saying that, what you're also saying to most of your family members is their marriages aren't valid.
Exactly.
Yeah, go on, Travis.
Exactly that. We are, and this is why a lot of people don't like the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church, in sticking to the truth, and just a reminder, the truth does not change according to how you feel about it. It doesn't change according to how I feel about it. The truth is the truth, whether you like it or not. And people hate that when the truth says something that's different from what they want to be the truth. And so in us saying we're becoming Catholic because we believe it's the truth and we adhere to its teachings, and its teachings are that we are not married and we are going through the process to become Catholic, that requires us to believe that you're not even married necessarily. We never said it that way, but that is effectively what we're saying. We expected there to be a lot of pushback. And so what ended up happening, Mabel and I are living like Catholics for 7 months. We haven't started living completely celibately, but we're really wrestling with that. I'm really wrestling with it, especially. Mabel's doing better than I was. For me, I was still caught in this, I believe it's true, but it's so hard for my life, and I'm wrestling with this. But we were actually in Colombia. It was June of 2023. We're in Colombia. The annulment process is about to start. As soon as I get back from that trip is when the investigations and the questions actually start. And it was in that trip, I'm looking at a picture actually of us in that trip and remembering what that was like. We decided that no, we're all in. Like, we have to live like brother and sister. And we didn't know how long that was going to be for, and it could have been forever. And we made that decision. Came back from Colombia, summer of 2023. The annulment investigation starts. I go in. I get all the questions asked. I'm there for about 90 minutes. It was intense. I was exhausted by the end of it. Embarrassed, because I've just recanted, the most profoundly humiliating experience of my life. But it's part of the process. My brother, my sister-in-law, 2 of my friends also have something similar. And then it became a waiting game. And this whole time, Mabel and I are living our lives as Catholics, but we can't participate in the sacraments. And so we can only be partially part of the community. Although the parishes were amazing, and I'll be forever grateful for how welcoming they were of us despite our irregular circumstances. But we knew that we could be waiting for a very long time. And even when we got an answer, it might not be the answer we were waiting for.
So yeah, at this point, you've decided to live celibately, and so we're coming to the topic of the discussion today. How did people react when you were telling them that you were living this way? Because, like you said, it's very countercultural. Like, in their eyes, you are married, but you're following these rules set by the Catholic Church. And so they think, tell me what they thought.
I still remember it actually, like my family when I told them, it's like, oh, like your marriage is gonna go like so bad, because the sex, right? Like that was like the main thing. It's like, Travis is gonna find somebody else, and so like they put all these little bugs in my head. I'm like, no, it's not, but okay. So like my family was very very opposed. Like let's put it that way. It's like you guys are crazy. Like this is definitely gonna like affect your marriage. You're gonna resent him and all that stuff. And like actually, this would have been like July. No, probably August or September actually. When we had already like actually deliberately like, okay, no, we're going. We're gonna be committed to living like brother and sister, right? I put my mom aside and I'm like, mommy, like you asked me you and my sister-in-law, my brother's wife, told me when a couple months before, several months before actually, that this was a bad idea. You like this is just really bad. But I'm like, I've actually found it the opposite. I've actually, there's a sense of me that has peace because I'm not like my thoughts aren't taking control of me essentially. And by that I mean is that like I'm not thinking, okay, if today I don't have sex with my husband, like this is gonna be bad, right? Like and I need to because I need to please him, and you know what I mean. Like these are the thoughts that actually haunt women, like, especially like married women, and even like women that are dating, just casually dating like men, like, and it is so bad, like honestly, and it's so I find that more degrading as a woman that these thoughts are actually what goes through our mind, and because we just let ourselves, get uh, like a marionette, by our culture, and it's unfortunately so sad. But I told that to my mom, and she's like she was so grateful that I actually told her that. And I mean, obviously, I and then from there she was just more supportive of it actually. And then she told me like, well, if since it's for the real, like I know it's for the real, for the right reasons, and God will provide. That's all. That's actually her word all the time. God God will God will provide. And so then I'm happy for you guys. I'll support it.
And I have to give Janet credit here because it would be easy for a lot of people to say, no way, you're lying to yourself. There's no
Yeah.
way that you're experiencing some deeper joy from not doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So credit to her for like actually believing you and like understanding that, there is more to life.
Yeah.
And I'll add to that, it's interesting now to think back to that because some of these conversations Mabel would make me aware of, others she wouldn't. And there were a couple things. For one, there was something deeply hilarious about a bunch of people who come from dumpster fire relationships themselves telling the married one what's good for her marriage. Like there's just something that was endlessly ironic about that, which I couldn't help but chuckle. I mean, I never told them that to their faces, but I'm just like, well, talk about the pot calling the kettle black. Like, give me a break here. We're all guilty of that. But this was a very funny instance of us receiving opinions and advice and everything, certainly not from a place of expertise or anything. And to what Mabel said, I think, when I was first made aware that she wrestled with some of those feelings herself, I was sad, but also not surprised because I think that's super normal in our hypersexualized, pornified, sex-obsessed secular culture where sex is everything. It's not surprising that a woman would be made to feel that way. And we both said to each other, isn't it amazing how much more we stressed about our physical intimacy when we were participating in it than once we stopped together, we made the decision together, and how much more secure we felt in our relationship with one another. That was a profound blessing. God knows best. And in our own pride, we refuse refuse to admit that, but that was our exact experience. It brought us closer together. I started to appreciate things about Mabel that had always been there, but I'd simply looked over or missed. And if not for us living celibately, brother and sister, effectively, I don't know that I ever would have seen those things. They were always there, but I would have been blind to them. And so, I don't know. Despite some of the pushback that we got, and it wasn't just Mabel's family, I got it too. Like, my father is the one who married us. And so for me to have to tell my father, who had been a Baptist pastor for 35 years, that, the thing that you did doesn't count. It's not a thing. I'm sorry. That was super hard. And I'd imagine it was really hard for him to hear and accept, but doesn't change the truth of the matter. And Mabel and I committed to that. I'm so glad that we did. It's such a profound blessing in hindsight. And of course, like, God knows best. We didn't know how it was going to turn out, but what happened? Fast forward 8 months. So way less time than we had been told it could be. We get the news that we're waiting for. April 16th, we hear that the annulment has come through. My first marriage was invalid. The reasons for that, for those who are curious, the reasons for that is because this person before, so what we called my ex-wife, no, we were never anything remotely like that, as we now know. But this person was categorically opposed to having children. I bought into that. And per what we talked about at the beginning here, marriage requires openness to life. And thus, if someone goes into a marriage and isn't open to life, it's not a marriage, can never be a marriage. And thus, that is why my first, what we call the marriage, was deemed basically null and void, had not been. So I received an annulment because of that single reason. The next day, Mabel got baptized. I had my first confession. We got confirmed in the church together. We received the Eucharist, which is incredible, for the first time, and our marriage was made instantly valid. The day after that, we flew to Rome, and the day after that, we went to Mass at St. Peter's Basilica. And maybe this is where we sort of wrap up the conversation. We were able to start having sex again, which was great, obviously, and we are pretty sure that Mabel got pregnant that day, and we are now expecting our first child, which is kind of the way that this whole process ended. We came into Christ Church, and then, because we did it the way God wants and wills for our lives, Mabel gets pregnant the first day, and I think there's some profound beauty in that fact.
Yeah, I think awesome story. It's been really cool to follow along and see you guys evolve over time too. I think there are stories from each one of our lives where we see, if we're truly executing on God's will for us, how beautiful things can really be. And it seemed like he was taking you on a journey of discovery of that very fact. And so to see it all come together was really awesome. So maybe just to wrap it up, if you guys have any advice for people that are currently not living according to Catholic tradition, even though they are Catholic or they're wanting to become Catholic, but are reluctant to do the hard thing, what advice would you give them?
I think for me, it's something that I actually learned through this journey. This was probably my pride, where I thought, God will provide, and I thought I believed it as much as I did during this period, actually, and He evidently did provide, because now I'm pregnant and we're expecting our first child. Thanks be to God, right? I think that's the right term. Trust in our Lord. Put all your trust. Doesn't matter what people will say, because there's always going to be opinions. Doesn't matter what you do. Even if you do the right choice, people are always going to well, you could have done it this way, right? There's always going to be something. I think, and obviously, if you have a great husband like I do, gracias a Dios. Also trust in them, and they know the best. They know the best for your family, right? I think trust in our Lord, and His time is perfect. That's another thing. It's not our will, it's His will, right? So just be patient and trust that everything will actually come to be, and just actually let go of whatever you're holding and give it to Him. Yeah.
And I will just build on that. I think everything Mabel just said is spot on. And I think in our own pride, we will think that we know best, and that's obviously not the case. And the only thing I would add to that is, if you are someone, if you're Catholic and you're not living according to the church's teachings, then I would ask you to consider learning more about why the church teaches what it teaches. It is for your good. Okay, it's not, the church isn't just about making rules for fun. Like, why would they do that? That's insanity. Why would they do that? It's for your good, because the church wants us, as Christ wants us, to flourish. And how do we flourish? By being in communion with our Creator, with God. And so the church's moral teachings, first and foremost on marriage, sex, bring us there. And Mabel and I think, are an example of that once we swallowed our pride and stopped thinking, I know best, which, in all the time I kept saying that, where did we find ourselves? With a string of broken relationships behind us, insecurity between one another, and not in a good place, feeling like our lives were empty, materially satisfied, and yet something was still missing. And I don't know, I wouldn't even wish that state of being that I was in on an enemy relative to where we are now. And so I think if you are a Catholic, remind yourself of the church's teachings, go talk to a priest. They will explain what they're good for, and then commit yourself to just trying to live by them. And if you're not a Catholic, unless you can look at our culture today, and I'm going to point you to what happened at the opening ceremony of the Paris Olympics, that's what our culture is all about. Okay, what happened there? And you don't need me to explain more. That's what our culture is all about from a sexuality perspective. Do you think that's happiness? Do you think that's good for us? Unless you can, with a straight face, tell me that you think that is best, then consider what the church is teaching on sexuality, would be my advice.
On that point, there's actually a quote from Gandhi that's something like, if even 100 Christians actually lived out their faith, there would be no Hindus in India. Now that's the problem. Like, we're held to such a high standard that it's very difficult to do the things that we are told to do. But ultimately, those things are for good. And when we do live our lives that way, people look at us and say, hey, I want that. And the reason for that is because that's literally the way God made us. It's the way he told us to live. And so there's a beauty in that we cannot recreate by executing our own will.
Amen.
Awesome. Well, should I wrap us up in prayer here? In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, we pray for a proper appreciation of our God-given gift of sexuality. Our world today has warped our sense of the true beauty of it, and thus how we use it in our lives. Help us to turn to our spiritual mother and father, Mother Mary and Saint Joseph. We turn to them and surrender ourselves to their care to show us how to appreciate and respect people of the opposite sex and live a truly holy married life to set an example for others and future generations. We pray all this in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you, Rigel, for praying. Thank you to my wife, Mabel, for joining us and for talking with us about sensitive things. I know that there are people who have been wanting us to talk about this, Catholic friends and non-Catholic friends wanting to understand really why we did this, what it looked like, what it meant. And yeah, so thank you, babe, for coming on and being open enough to do the thing that you would never do otherwise. We really appreciate it. So thank you so much. To everyone that tuned in, thank you for listening. We hope you'll come back for another episode. Until then, this has been the Coffee, Commerce, and Catechesis podcast. God bless you.
God bless you.